This is BarCode, a cocktail-powered podcast that dives deep into the personalities, criminals, and heroes that have come to define security across the globe. Please join our host, Chris Glandon, for another wild foray into the incredible world of humans and how they intertwine with today's modern technology. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Three, two, one.
Activate.
Casey Ellis is the founder of Bugcrowd and co-founder of the Disclose.io project, widely recognized for pioneering crowdsourced security and modern bug bounty programs. A 20-plus year veteran of cybersecurity, he's advised governments, intelligence communities, and Fortune 500s on vulnerability disclosure, election security, and cyber policy. Based in the Bay Area, Casey is a serial entrepreneur, investor, and advocate for good faith hackers worldwide. Casey, thanks so much for stopping by BarCode.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Absolutely, man. And it was great catching up with you at Hacker Summer Camp. I think we have maybe crossed paths before that, but actually getting to talk to you and chat with you there was awesome. And so when we talked there, I was telling you about the podcast and how I love hearing about hacker origin stories. And I read that you had once made the statement that making technology misbehave was sort of something that you focused on in your youth. So, I would love for you to expand on that if you don't mind, and just tell me more about that. What was sort of the spark that ignited your interest into this field?
Yeah, for sure. This is like hacking, I think, in like the pure technology sense, like prior to it kind of becoming like a computer security, like offensive thing for me. And really what it came from was the fact that like my dad was a science teacher. Like he'd take me out of elementary school and bring me to high school to monkey about with stuff. He'd bring things home. And just, I had a lot of curiosity for how things worked. I wanted to, tear things apart, put them back together again, see if I could, fix things that are broken, like get them to do things that they're not meant to. It was like radios, electronics, like stuff like that. So it was a combination, I think, of a really like, all props to him, like creating a really good environment for me to just tinker, but also like just the curiosity. I had to kind of rip things apart and kind of explore the creative world in that way. So yeah, at some point a computer came home and pretty much everything that I've been doing on the hardware side kind of transited across into that, and it kind of all went from there.
Nice. So would you consider yourself to be self-taught, or was there any resources for you at that time to really take and learn from?
I mean, I don't believe that anyone's truly self-taught. In a lot of ways, I think I had dad early on the hardware side. I think learning basic and then just kind of pushing the edges of what it was meant to do and starting to find kind of different things that made me feel like I was getting some degree of mastery over the system. There was always kind of manuals to read and different things like that. In terms of actual offensive security, there wasn't really a lot around at that point in time. Eventually I kind of stumbled over into bulletin boards and IRC and all that kind of stuff. And that's really where I had the opportunity to learn from other people. This is like in the early days of Loft and Cult of the Dead Cow and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
As that kind of very early kind of like zine type content started to appear, that was around about the same time that I was just kind of getting into the game. So there's, I think folks that were maybe 5 or 10 years ahead of me that, I ended up standing on their shoulders for those early parts.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So then fast forward to, let's say like the 2012 timeframe was when sort of pioneered the crowdsourced approach with Bugcrowd. And back then, I think bug bounties were, more of an experiment or an experimental idea. So I guess what convinced you that this model could transform the way organizations approach security?
Yeah, definitely. It was really two things. And you're right, like Bugcrowd didn't invent bug bounty programs or vulnerability disclosure programs. That was kind of prior art, but we did pioneer this idea of basically putting a platform in between the hacker community and folks that need their input in order to make it all work, right? Fast forward from like origin story stuff that we were just talking about through, basically 6 years as a pen tester, then kind of Breaking Bad and moving across into sales and solution architecture for a period. And then getting it in my head, I wanted to be an entrepreneur, like quitting and starting to work on stuff. The company that I was doing prior to Bugcrowd was a pen testing shop. And like we did good work, right? But one of the things that always bugged me about that model was that like one person being paid by the hour is never going to be able to outsmart what's ultimately a crowd of adversaries that are kind of collaboratively contributing to intrusion. It's like the math is wrong. This is just a core kind of economics problem. It's got nothing to do with bug bounties or VDP or hackers or any of that stuff. It's just got to do with the fact that like if you apply the most brains and the most resource, you'll get in, full stop. So that was kind of the thing that was bugging me. And the other side of it was like having grown up in the hacker community, knowing that there's all these people that like think bad but do good. They understand, they've got like mastery of technology in their pocket, and they enjoy thinking like a criminal, but their intent and their kind of ethical framework is to help and try to use that in a way that's not harmful, right? But like, you know, the world was kind of terrified of them at the time. So you've got this like huge crowd of bad guys on one side, you've got this like pen tester being paid by the hour on the other side, and a math problem there, and then behind that you've got this enormous community that's just kind of waiting for an invite to the table. So that was where it's like, wait a sec, if I just take, you know, really what is the latent kind of potential of the hacker community and plug it into the unmet demand into the defender side of things, like that's probably going to work. And there's going to be an uphill battle around getting people comfortable with hackers, building a business, all those different things. But I sort of always viewed it as like, I do tend to kind of derive things back to, you know, what I like to call like issues of physics. It's like, you know, between now and the heat death of the universe, this is going to be how we do this stuff. So like, why not kind of accelerate that, which is kind of what I do. Yeah.
So how did you develop the core of testers and get people to sort of believe in that system? And then also on the other side of that, like how did you work through the legalities? Because I'm sure there are legalities involved when you want to start something like this.
Yeah, 100%. Look, the tester piece was kind of fun. Like that was because like when you're going through the early stages of a startup, you know, depending on your approach, for me, it's always like prove the fact that the thing that you're trying to do will actually have a chance of working in the first place. Oftentimes companies don't necessarily do that, but that's a kind of an order of operations that I try to stick with. So the first thing was like, okay, are the hackers going to actually show up? Do we have a viable supply side to kind of work with to try to plug into this stuff? And pretty much, you know, going back to what I was saying before about BBS and IRC back in the really early days, like that turned into, you know, Twitter and kind of different kind of community contact points that I had was, you know, just the online community and my friends, right? And I pretty much put out a tweet saying, hey, I've got this crazy idea. If you want to hack some cool shit, like sign up here and, you know, tell your friends and we'll see how it goes. And literally like it went, you know, the 2011 version of viral at that point in time. It wasn't, you know, hundreds of thousands, but there was at least probably 3,000 people that signed up over the next, you know, couple of weeks to a month. And in that list, there was people like, you know, HD Moore, like Jay Cran, like, you know, legends that I'd kind of grown up looking up to, and people that are now friends, which is kind of a cool byproduct of all this, who were basically putting their hand up saying, yeah, I'll play, like, let's do it. Yeah. So like that was the initial piece where it's like, all right, supply side's there. And they were just keen to go. So that like that was the really important part. I think the bit that came after that was proving the model. So I kind of ran a program on an app that I'd coded myself. It got completely destroyed. And I was looking at the creativity being applied to it in a competitive construct. And it's like, this is like orders of magnitude more creative than anything I've ever seen in a pen test, just because of that diversity of input and the competitive kind of element to it, right? And then really it was a matter of convincing customers to let me try it out on them. Like the early days was basically just going to pen test companies or pen test customers that I'd worked with in the past who trusted, like they knew me and they trusted me.
Got it.
And I had a, you know, established relationship there, and pretty much saying to them, look, here's the kind of the raw material that I'm working with here. Here's kind of the concept. Like, do you think that you'd get better return on investment, you know, paying 50 people to do a thing versus one person to do a thing? And like the answer to that's yes, because math, I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work or not. Like your cat might catch on fire. Like who the hell knows? It's alpha as all get out right now. But if you trust me to do it, like I'd love to have you as a design partner. And it kind of all just went from there. It just worked really effectively, very quickly. And it surfaced the fact that there was like a deep discontent with the sense of return on investment that was coming from the pen test industry at that point in time. So we're kind of off to the races from there.
Interesting, man. And what did you ultimately scale to? Where would you say you are now?
What, as an organization? I mean, we've raised over the years, I think it's $180 million. We're about 500 employees. There's probably 750,000 people registered on the platform. Thousands. I got to have a better answer for this because I'm trying to think of the exact customer count, but it's in the thousands, and it kind of ranges from like Department of Defense that we do a ton of work with, like right through to Facebook, like Meta, big technology companies, automotive companies. We do a lot of work now with like the AI companies. So OpenAI is a customer; they have been for 3.5 years or so. So yeah, it kind of in that early season, it was prove the concept, get it out of the garage, see if it's going to work or not. And the other thing that we did that in hindsight I'm really grateful for as a strategy, aside from coming to the US, because I think this could have been built from Australia, but if it was going to work, it was going to move really quickly. And to do that, I wanted to be in the place that you move quickly, which is here. But the other thing we did was to make sure that we were getting customers that didn't look like crazy Bay Area tech companies as quickly as we could. It's like, this is not just like a Google thing or a Facebook thing or an eBay thing. It's not like this sort of early adopting, right in 10 years time. But if you're a financial services company, you're looking at them like they're crazy. Like it shouldn't just be that domain. It should jump out of that as quickly as possible so that we can talk about this as a whole of market solution, not just a tech one. So that happened pretty early as well.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. You don't want the misconception that you're targeting these smaller firms when everyone needs it.
Yeah, I mean smaller firms, but also like, because some of the tech companies are pretty big, right? Like they're viable customers to have. The challenge with them is that they just look absolutely nothing like the rest of the industry. Like if you compare, a JP Morgan Chase with a Meta, they're both, super conscious about security. Like they're both doing all these different things, but they play by a different set of rules. And the stuff that Meta does, like right on the frontier of tech innovation, like JPMC is probably going to get around to in a few years' time. So if you just focus on like your Meta type customers, then you end up having conversations with banks or retailers or these more traditional industries, and they're like, yeah, that's crazy talk. We're not going to do that. So we wanted to dispel that myth as quick as we could.
I'm curious, man, if you could name or not name any specific organization, what would you say is like the craziest or the most unexpected bug bounty submission that you have ever seen? What was like so off the wall that you couldn't believe it when you first saw it?
I appreciate you giving me a heads up on this question ahead of time, because like I've been doing this for 13 years, right? It's basically hacking the internet at scale since 2012 was really when we got going for real, and I've seen a lot of shit. Like the internet's a pretty broken place in some very interesting ways, and the hacker community is super creative. So one that jumped out was an automotive, basically testing prototype vehicles. This is maybe 2017 or 2018, and like a little crew kind of got together, like the person that knew radio, the person that knew cloud, the person that knew all these sort of different, it's like the Voltron robot, like assembling type of thing. And the chain they ended up completing was basically packet injection onto the CAN bus through, I think it was the LiDAR on the front of the car.
Interesting.
Which is like pretty wild when you think about it, and you think about the stuff that's on a CAN bus as well. Like you've got, at that point in time, you had the ability to EOL the airbag, which detonates the airbag. And there's no authentication on a CAN bus because it was created and designed in a period where there wasn't like this concept of untrusted people inside the car, right? So there's all of these like crazy kind of downstream consequences of that type of thing. That one was really fun. Another good one was another live hacking event. Like I love hardware and seeing hackers kind of do their thing collaboratively. It's just super interesting and a lot of fun, and usually pretty high impact as well. And the TLDR was they reversed out firmware, kind of backed out some keys that were in the wrong place, and then through basically a series of pivots, they were able to actually get into the storage area where all of the recordings for that entire security camera ecosystem was stored. So it wasn't just like a hardware thing. They actually used it to get back into the storage on the back end, and obviously that's not what you want as a security camera company. So those are two pretty good ones.
Yeah. So when a company comes to you and they say, look, this is this is the infrastructure, this is what we want tested, I assume that you can virtualize a lot of that, right? I assume none of these tests are really done on site. When they provide you the infrastructure, is everything sort of virtualized to hand off to the bug bounty hunters? Or
no, actually, honestly, like
No.
we can do that. I think it's important to call out that like when you say the word bug bounty, people get a particular thing in their head. It's like this idea of an open public program where you get paid if you find something cool. That's one version of it. What we also do, and you know, this is a big part of kind of what we pioneered in the category, is this idea of basically graphing the crowd and then being able to, you know, divvy up like the right skills for the right program, like actually inviting people to do things under NDA, you know, finding ways to deploy people and compensating them based on time or based on the tasks they complete. So there's all sorts of ways to cut it up, if that makes sense. I think with those private programs, what you're describing right now is a little bit more common, where it'll be like a virtualized environment, or we'll test against UAT or, you know, a DR setup or whatever. For the public ones, it's almost always production, just because that's sort of the nature of it. It's like you're already out on the internet, so you might as well get the report. This is kind of a phrase that I throw around that, like, yeah, everyone is already running a vulnerability disclosure program or a bug bounty program. It's just sometimes you're not getting the report.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like folk that realize that's usually against prod.
Yeah. Do you test against like critical infrastructure systems as well?
Yeah, those tend to be like a digital twin or like a test setup. You know, you don't want to set a bunch of people loose against, you know, water systems or power or any of that kind of thing. Sometimes like there is definitely kind of lighter touch tests that we've done, especially on the, you know, call it on the like the high side, where it will be production infrastructure. Those are always like super tightly scoped. It's similar to what you'd expect doing a pen test, right? It's like, don't go crazy on this. If you know, this has got SCADA systems in there. If you nmap it, things are going to fall over. Don't do that, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, for critical infrastructure, it's usually like demo or test environments. You know, there's a lot of those types of infrastructure do have these kind of test areas where they'll build like a virtual city and deploy all of the kit that's used to run, you know, the real world, and it's there specifically for the purpose of testing. So
got it.
Yeah, if there's going to be a safety criticality kind of component to it, then like, yeah, we don't want to be heroes with that stuff, but hopefully I'm painting the picture that you can kind of do it a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And hopefully they're providing you a close one-to-one replica of, you know, real life.
Yeah. This is,
100%,
man. And this is where, like, honestly, my kind of roots in pen testing and kind of vuln research come back into it, because I fully agree. It's like anything that's not the thing that you're actively trying to test is just invariably going to be a little bit different. And sometimes it'll be different in ways that impact the test. Like that's been a consideration with pen testing for as long as I've been in the game. It's just a question of like, is the risk of that worth the return or not, and kind of figuring that out with the client before you get going.
Yeah, it's the same with prod and UAT and how close that organization keeps those two.
Yeah. So I do think with hardware and CI stuff, it tends to be pretty accurate, because they'll do like full on. Sometimes they'll use us for this as well, but they'll do like full on wargaming against that kind of kit. And like disaster scenario planning and all that kind of stuff. And for that to be effective, it's got to be, you know, as close a replica as possible in the same way that it kind of impacts us when we're doing kind of vuln research and exploit dev.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. I want to switch lanes for just a moment. You're an active advocate for the rights of good faith cybersecurity research.
Yes, sir.
If you don't mind, just talk a little bit about what that means, and then why you think it's important to frame hacking as a positive force.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, coming from where we've sort of come from as an industry, like my own experience and the experience of my peers, like we kind of, you think about when the CFA was written in, I think it was 1984 or 1986, basically Reagan watched war games and freaked the hell out and went to the DOJ, and that's how the CFAA was born, right? So like there is this sort of cultural and kind of policy heritage around hacking that's almost entirely framed by fear. And kind of, if you're hacking, you must be bad because that's the only version of this that we fully understand. So therefore, we're going to legislate that. And what it turned into, really was this sort of chilling effect on hackers that want to operate in good faith or just want to do security research, and they're not doing it for malicious reasons, right? Like they're kind of like, is my door going to get kicked in? Like, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, what that nets out to is that they're unplugged from being in a position where they can actually help or even collaborate, right? And to me, that's a huge disservice to the safety and the security of the internet. It sucks for that community. And yeah, I've kind of referred to it as like an autoimmune deficiency, right? It's like if hackers are the internet's immune system, this kind of equates to an immune deficiency problem. So how do we correct that? How do we get the benefit of the hacker community, but also have them get the benefit of being in a position where they're safe and able to do the security research and continue to kind of lead the frontier of the internet itself, right? So you can hear, like, when I get going on this, I get kind of wound up because it's, I will, no matter what I do in my career, like that is a hill I'll definitely die on, because it's something that I believe in very deeply. And the good news is that we've, seen a lot of progress in that space over the past 12 years. Like, not just, I think at this point in time, when you say hacker to a layperson, they still assume that you're talking about like the bad kind, right? And part of the reason for that, I think, is that, cyber criminals do self-identify as hackers as well. But the conversation that we can have now that we weren't able to have 10 years ago is this idea that like hacking's like a morally agnostic dual use skill set. Like, it's powerful. And yes, 100% you can do some pretty evil shit with it, but you can do that with your car, or you can do that with your kitchen knife, or like, anything's dual use if you're creative and motivated enough, right? So this idea of it like not being inherently bad, just powerful, I think that's a conversation that's a lot easier to have now, which is good.
I agree. I think I've seen the progression from the outside looking in become a little bit, more advanced now in understanding what that term means. So how would you say, like, practitioners or leaders or, even listeners of this show, how can they get involved and help, contribute to that cause?
Yeah, no, 100%. That's a great question. I think we're in a really interesting and fairly kind of fluid period in cyber policy just in general. But cyber policy, particularly in the US, I don't think it's just the US. Like, you think about like the impact that AI is having on technology and how everyone's trying to get their head around that at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Like, there's all of these different sort of plates that are spinning right now. And I think probably the big thing for listeners is to engage with things like Disclose.io, like engage with things like the Hackers on the Hill group that go and actually take technologists to meet with lawmakers once a year to be able to like ask questions of each other. Like, let's just learn how do we understand each other better, because we understand computers probably better than they do, but they understand policy and law better than we do. So like, let's mind meld and get that kind of thing done. I think probably the other bit, and this is definitely a US centric thing, but there are 50 states and there is a 10th Amendment. So like, things that change at the federal level don't necessarily mean that there's a change at the state level. And there's a lot of there's a pretty profound lack of harmonization in laws and rules that actually affect people trying to do security research in good faith across the different states. So I think for think global, act local kind of folk in the listenership here, getting aware of what those issues might be. Like, this is where you can actually contact your local representative, and they will listen, because it becomes an issue of retail politics for them, and you're actually in exactly the right position to be able to influence that. So those are a couple of ideas there.
Yeah, interesting. In terms of government, right? Because you've done some advising to the White House, to the DOD, to the DOJ, as well as international intelligence communities. How are these government entities sort of adapting to the pace of the current threat landscape, and where do you see sort of the biggest deficiencies being?
Yeah, I think, how they're adapting to the current threat landscape, I think in general is, I would say poorly, but aware of that. Like, there's this issue where policy is almost always a trailing indicator of a problem that needs to be solved, right? Like that's sort of the nature of how policy gets written most of the time, right? And the challenge with that is that like technology moves and evolves so quickly that there's always going to be a lag there. So I think that's why I say poorly, because the good bit of news there is I think most governments that I've worked with and most agencies I've worked with have become very acutely aware of that over the past 5 or 6 years. And they're doing everything they can to bring in, technologists and people that can kind of understand to whatever degree we can, like the political considerations and the policy and the legal considerations, but also that can actually just speak as experts on, what needs to happen when and what the consequences are of writing policy a certain way or whatever else it might be. So there's a lot of that going on. I do feel like the US has sort of backed off on that a little bit over the past, year. It went from being very, very kind of open and collaborative and easy to access to it being quite a kind of tight group. So that's sort of, where it's up to here at the moment. I do see those groups reaching out and starting to re-engage the community and bring that stuff back in. So there's progress happening there.
It's good.
I think where the deficiencies are, in particular, I mean, it varies country to country, but speaking to the US, probably the biggest challenge I can see right now is that like we've just kind of fired a whole bunch of people, over the past 10 or 11 months. And, we can have all the great ideas in the world around like what kind of future we want to create, but you do need like bums in seats to actually implement that stuff. So I do feel like there's a bit of tension on that side. And again, this is not like, it's not something that people aren't aware of, but it is definitely an area of struggle, I think, in the US right now.
Yeah, it's a good point. And it's going to take time to sort of rebuild that too, because you need that hierarchy to make things happen.
Yeah. I mean, the other side of that, that's a important kind of call out with the shift as well, is that like, the world's getting progressively more hostile as we go along, just in general. And like cyber as a theater of warfare, that is a real thing, as well as, cyber underpinning like domestic safety, national security, like, defense, like all those different things. I think the obviousness of that being true has really kind of made itself clear over the past probably 3 years. And there's a lot of things that I think we kind of thought about, over the past 10 years that might not necessarily translate that well into the next 10. So this is where, going back to the audience, like it's especially like the younger generations and how they're thinking about what the future might look like. I think those are the folk that really need to get engaged with this stuff right now, as it's kind of in the process of being rewritten.
I do want to talk about that in a minute too.
Yeah,
but
sure.
With going back to like government, for me, it was always like, I've never been involved with that sector. So for me, it was the unknown. Like there were always conversations whether, the public or the private sector is more ahead of technology, or is it just we don't know or understand what's being developed there. So having that purview inside of sort of that pace that they operate at is good to know.
Yeah. I think it's, I mean, like the big thing, I'm one of the ambassadors for Hackers on the Hill, so I'll take people around and introduce them to lawmakers and all that kind of stuff. Because like I've ultimately, with the Australian accent and the pink no-fawn badge of shame and all of that, I've still been kind of doing this around DC for probably 10 years now, which is neat. But the thing that's consistent when I take people in is like, oh crap, like you actually want to talk to us. Like I didn't realize you cared. I didn't realize I could give this input. I didn't realize that you'd actually listen to it and actually like for real seek to understand it. It's always like almost a bit of a shock to the hacker community when they experience that. And I think letting people know that that's a thing, like they do want to hear us. There's like Policy Village at DEF CON. There's all sorts of different forums where people can get involved directly. And like, honestly, it's just a matter of showing up 90% of the time, like having something to say, like understanding, the legislator that you want to speak to and what their priorities are and being kind of as sensitive to that as you can be, but then just literally showing up.
Yeah.
All
right. So one thing we talked about offline was crowdsourcing offensive security engagements versus AI and the automated tools that we're seeing emerge constantly. We're fresh off of Black Hat, so we all have just seen this live and in person. So with AI's role in vulnerability discovery and exploit development, how do you see that relationship between the human-driven, crowdsourced security approach and AI-driven techniques? And then where do you see the greatest need for human expertise in security testing today?
Yeah, so this is a domain that has fascinated me ever since the frontier kind of generative AI models dropped. And like we've been, playing around like securing using machine learning and AI in a Bugcrowd context for 6 or 7 years. But the thing that happened when ChatGPT dropped was all of a sudden like the entire kind of population of the internet sort of woke up to like what this stuff is and what it means. And that's not a thing that happens that often at such a like broad scale, right? So yeah, the use of AI in offensive security. So I'm an advisor to Dreadnode. Like I've done a fair bit of work with a couple of other startups on more the code review and vulnerability discovery and remediation side of things. Dreadnode is very much focused on like research driven offense and building out a platform and a framework to actually allow people to build on top. So that's sort of how I've been trying to stay close to the coalface on this stuff. And yeah, in some ways it's completely transformative, and in some ways it's just another tool. I think it's really what it comes down to. I do think that AI is going to, you throw the ball out 10 years into the future, it's going to have impacted everything in some form or fashion. I truly do believe that. I don't think it's replacing humans fully at any point in the near future. I do think it's going to take a lot of the commoditized work or the things that are easier or maybe shouldn't be as sold for quite as much money as they're sold for sometimes or whatever else, and I think actually threaten the margin of businesses like that and end up taking a bunch of that work. I do think that's going to be a thing that I think we're actually already starting to see that, but I think that'll continue. But yeah, in terms of the role of the researcher, like what I keep coming back to is this idea that, like crime, like why are we all here, right? Like if bad guys packed up and went home, we could arguably just tools down and go, sip Mai Tais on a beach or something, right? So if you sort of believe in this idea that the security industry exists because of the presence of an attacker, and our job is to increase the cost of attack to that attack to the point where it becomes irrational for them. Like that's sort of how I sum up in my head what we do, like all of us, right? AI doesn't replace that. It just makes their ability to get the thing done cheaper and more effective. And, arguably it helps us defend in a similar way because we all have access to the same tools, right?
Yeah.
So this idea of like, we're here because of a creative adversary, like to me, that suggests that human creativity is always going to have a role in defense as well.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I just
and that's a very heat death of the universe, like 20 years out, sort of physics explanation of how I think about that. But honestly, I feel like it holds water, right? Because like frontier vulnerability research is still, I don't see that stuff getting basically replaced by AI like anytime soon at all. Like I said before, I do see chunks of it getting kind of undercut by AI, and I do see AI being an incredible tool in the hands of researchers to do things they weren't able to do before and have it kind of decrease their time to success. But the whole idea of it just sort of taking over everything and making it all happen, it's like, I find it really hard to stomach that.
Yeah, that makes me feel uneasy. Like I don't want to see that happen.
I mean, part of it's because I don't want to see it happen, but part of it because of what I just said. I just don't see how, unless the bad guys pack up and go home because AI has made attacks so easy and defense so easy that it's just not worth them doing that anymore. Then maybe, but like I can't. Crime predates the internet by a couple of thousand years, and I don't think AI is going to change that.
We hear about the good versus bad. We hear about black hats eventually becoming white hats and working on the good side, which I'm sure you know people that have been down that path. I know people that have been down that path. Have you ever seen the reverse, where you have someone on the good side that crosses over to the dark side?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of specific examples, and I'm struggling right now. But there are definitely folk that they've worked in a like quote unquote white hat job I think the thing that's probably more often true is that you've got people that are working legitimately. They've got kind of a grey or a blackish component to what they're doing that they don't talk about as much, and then all of a sudden that sort of criminal side grows and supplants the white hat side.
Got it.
That's
like
the
the
thing.
Insider threat type of perspective, right?
Yeah. So there's.
Or are you talking about going just full cyber criminal?
Well, actually, no. Insider threat is a really good example of that. So like you think about like the 1,000 Talents program. You think about sort of different places where folk will get coerced from the outside to steal data or to leak intellectual property. I'm not convinced that everyone who ends up in that position necessarily intended to become a criminal. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's circumstance, it's duress, it's coercion, it's like life happens, like whatever. There's a million different reasons why that can, a person can kind of make that decision.
Yeah.
And to me, really what it comes back to is, making sure that, as best we can, there's an outlet for folk to be able to do this stuff in a way that's rewarding and profitable for them. That has less friction associated with it than kind of going off and getting into cybercrime.
Yeah. Yeah. It's typically the like you said, the payouts, like it's just hard to, if you have that in front of you and you have that opportunity, I'm sure for a lot of people, it's a very, difficult decision to make.
I think it can be. I do definitely, like we've seen like tons of examples in the US over the past, like Australia as well. It's sort of happening all around the world of like how real the insider threat actually is, and how like the kind of trust boundaries and the ways that we think about recruiting and like access to information, all those different things. It's like probably to me that's not actually a problem that you can fully ever defend against, because in reality, like people are going to people, right? Like you trust them, you get to know them as best you can, all that kind of stuff, but then you've still got to mitigate that risk to some extent. Otherwise you end up in a position where that fails at some point in the future. So
yeah. And that not all of that is under your control all the time. You don't know type of variables or what someone's going through to
exactly. And I will say that like I struggle with the the definition of like black hat and white hat as being this really easy to delineate and easy to understand thing. Like strictly speaking, through my career, I've been a grey hat for most of it. Right, because like not necessarily going out there to cause harm or doing anything with malicious intent, but if you look at the letter of the law, there's been some tiptoeing going on there. I think it's true for a lot of people. The other side of it is like when you think about who the white hats are. My favorite question to ask to just sort of illustrate this point is like, is the NSA black hat or white hat?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the answer you get to that question is going to depend a lot on who you ask. So I think there's a simplicity that I think gets kind of foisted on that construct that actually doesn't scale at all.
No, that makes sense.
I think I've never quite figured out what to actually do with that, but I think it's an important thing to kind of keep in mind.
And who's defining white hat? Is the person defining white hat? I mean, how much truth does that hold?
Well, it depends on if they get caught.
Right.
If they do something that's illegal and they get caught for it, then it's a judge that's gonna decide that.
Yeah.
But, I do think that like going back to the examples we were talking about before, there are a bunch of really good examples of basically kids that were in like a difficult position from like a poverty standpoint that have gone out and done, double ransom extortion and different things like that. Not necessarily because they set out to do that or because they got recruited, but because they just came into possession of something they realized was valuable.
Yeah.
And they're like, I need this money and this is a way to do that. I'm going to go off and do that. And all of a sudden, they're felons and they're kind of screwed at that point. Like that's a thing that happens a lot. And to me, I don't have a firm conviction that those people went into that wearing a black hat.
Yeah. That's a great point. Mm-hmm. Yep. I want to go back to your entrepreneurial journey really quick. As an entrepreneur myself, there's, I love talking to folks that have been down this path before. So what would you say has sort of been the toughest lesson that you've learned along the way, and how have those lessons affected or impacted the way that you mentor or advise aspiring entrepreneurs or startups today?
Look, I think a lot of the lessons, good and bad for me, because I am very much a like make lemonade from lemons kind of guy. So like even when things fall apart or catch on fire, there's always lessons that are hidden in that type of thing that you can actually take and turn into a win in the future. Yeah, I think a lot of the most difficult things have really come down to leadership, feeling like I've disappointed people along the way because I was kind of over my skis in terms of where I was up to understanding business or executing or whatever else was going on at the time. Those sorts of things that do happen along the way. They're pretty difficult to fully avoid, but like there's some of the harder lessons I think for me to kind of think back on and not avoid, I guess. But really, like the antidote to that, from my perspective, is mentorship. It's it's humility. It's like going into leadership with this sense of like intellectual honesty, like humility, a clear sense of where you're going to go, and it's like holding like the core things as tightly as you can, but then holding everything else pretty loosely, and then sort of trusting your team and building a team around you that like complements the things that you're not good at, right? It's not just like taking the things. To me, humility is like, I can rock up and say, hey, if we go to the mat on these three things, like I'm going to win because I'm world class. But then there's everything else, and I'm going to need a hand with all of that, right?
Yeah,
so there's this idea of backing yourself in the things that that you're good at, but then like realizing that doesn't make you perfect at everything, and then trying to figure out how to integrate that feedback. I think I'm sort of answering both your questions there. That is something that I talk to entrepreneurs about a lot, like that idea of like find people that have done the things that you want to do, that have gone kind of where you want to go, and hopefully a little bit further than that. And then just go and ask them a bunch of really stupid questions that'll make you feel really embarrassed. And they're going to do the same thing to you, because one of the things about mentors, especially folks that have been around for longer, is they actually love doing this, because like the next generation are kind of what keep us current with what's happening in technology in a way that we might be sort of in the process of aging out of, right? Like that's a really common phenomena that entrepreneurs don't necessarily understand. Like they come up super timid. I'm like, no, like I'm going to learn as much from you as you will from me.
Yeah.
So like,
let's
make it happen, right?
Yeah, that's ideal. And when you're talking about building a team around you, something that I struggle with is delegation. So as an entrepreneur, you have to learn how to do all these things, and where your strengths are. Yep. And it's for me, I struggle with delegating work to someone else. And maybe it's just, the matter of just going through those cycles and training someone up or bringing the right people in. But for me, it's like, I want to see this to the very end, and I'm going to die on my own sword if I have to. And I think that's something I need to work on.
It's like, I can completely relate to that too, by the way, because it's one of those ones I do think like learning delegation, learning how to like communicate things that you're trying to package off to someone else clearly in a way they can follow. Like that's always for me a work in progress. I think the other side of it is that, if you love what you do, and if you like genuinely like found a level irrationally pissed off about a thing that you think you can solve, and like that's a part of you, right? Then there's this sort of sense that like no one else is going to get that in the way that I do, and no one could ever be as good at this as I am. And that's just not true. Because ultimately, like everyone's going to do it a little bit differently, and you've got to, as a leader, get through that little dip in the output where it's not quite going the way that you'd want to do it. Because if you get to the other side of that and you get to the right person, you get the right person in the seat, then all of a sudden you got the ability to scale, right? And they ultimately should be better at it than you are. Like that's to me, like in terms of how you hire folk, it's always getting people in that could take your job. If they wanted to, right? Yeah.
So, Casey, we talked about this before, but wanted to talk briefly here about this as well. And it's the generational shift in cybersecurity that's happening now from sort of an old school to the new school era, right? So how do you see the role of content creation, media, podcasts, for instance? These are aspects that we didn't really have coming up into the industry. So how do you see that evolving as the new talent enters this field?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's huge. I think, it's an opportunity for connection between like older generations and younger ones. And I'm a very, like, I gave a talk on this at B-Sides Las Vegas. I'm a very strong believer in this idea that like the younger generations and the older ones need to be listening to each other just as much, because we've seen stuff they haven't, but they know things that we don't, right? So like media as a forum for that to happen, I think is incredibly important. I do think that, personal brands and building all those different things out is pretty important to some of these upcoming generations, probably more so than it was for us. So like giving them the opportunity to do that and trying to help them do that, I think is a huge thing. There's a lot there, but those are some of my thoughts on that.
Do you think it's becoming oversaturated, or do you still think it's becoming more difficult for, people, especially that are getting into the field and want to learn and leveraging content as that resource? Do you think that's becoming a crowded space right now? Or do you think that's a good thing?
I do. I mean, if we're talking about how this impacts the next generation, then I'm not really the right person to ask.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like I look at it in terms of like what exactly in terms of what I see and like how much I feel completely overloaded by all of the different options to learn stuff in any given day. But I consume, content as a 44-year-old. And the younger generations maybe don't have the same restraints or considerations. So it's different. I don't know. I don't know is the honest answer to that one. Hey,
Casey. So as we all know, security is sometimes a very high stress, although high rewards type of industry. So just curious, what is your go-to ritual, your go-to hobby when you do have downtime and need to recharge?
Yeah. So drumming. I've been a musician my entire life. Playing with the kids, like doing that kind of stuff, getting outdoors is something that I always try to do. I like shooting as well. So like literally just air gunning as a kind of a meditative thing. So yeah, those are a couple of the things I do to kind of unplug.
Oh man. So we're fresh off Vegas again, a lot of parties, a lot of meetups. We caught up at a meetup, some really cool venues in Vegas. I'm just curious, what's the coolest, most unique bar or bar type of venue that you've ever been to? Doesn't need to be Vegas. And what made that venue special?
Yeah, I would actually say it's the one that was under the Bugcrowd office in San Francisco that we used to have. So we had this old red brick building that was on Front Street that used to be basically a cannery. So there was this sort of cellar in the center of it that the owner had turned into a speakeasy. And it was badass. Like it was one of the reasons I wanted that particular office.
I was going to say, that sounds strategic to me.
There's a little bit. There's definitely some, we had a lot of good parties in there. It was good for, hiring people and all that kind of stuff.
Cool, man. What was the other reason?
So that was literally the Bugcrowd office, but it did remind me of a place in Sydney called the Baxter Inn, which is like a speakeasy down a fire escape, blah, blah, blah. If people look it up, they'll see it and they'll get it.
That's interesting. Somebody else called that out too. That venue.
Oh, for real?
Yeah, I have to go back and see who called that out.
It's a phenomenal bar. Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, I just heard last call. Casey, you got time for one more?
Sure.
All right. If you decided to open a cybersecurity-themed bar, what would the name be, and what would your signature drink be called?
I know exactly where it'd be too. There's this restaurant / bar in Dulles Airport where if you go there, like there's just all kinds of OPSEC fail from people that have flying in and out, right? So I would actually buy that bar. I would rename it the Skiff, and the drink would be called Running with Scissors, and it would be a variation of the Moscow Mule.
I love that.
Yeah,
let me know when you get there. Yeah. I'll drive down for that.
Nice.
Thanks again, Casey. Really appreciate you stopping by and sharing your insights with us. Before you run, how can folks listening connect with you online?
Yeah, for sure. So Bugcrowd is just bugcrowd.com. Disclose.io is literally disclose.io. I am at, so my blog website is cje.io. And I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, and all the things just as Casey John Ellis. So, depending on which version of contact me you're looking for, that's how you do it.
Cool, man. And where can we catch you live next? Do you have any conferences that you're lining up yet for the rest of the year? Or are you taking the rest of the year off?
That's a good question. I think I'm I'm gonna do LabsCon, and then I'm probably gonna go to B-Sides Canberra in Sydney.
Nice.
Those are the two that I can think of right now. Yeah.
Cool, man. All right, Casey. Thanks again, man. You take care.
Thanks so much for your time, man. Cheers.
Cheers.